What top 5 you smoking on?
Outsider.
Cause my top 5 is
Elden Ring, Elden Ring, Elden Ring, Elden.
The top of many Game of the Year lists in 2022 will be dominated by a single release. From Software's Elden Ring, having sold over 13 million copies as of May, and sitting at a 96% approval rating on Metacritic, the highest of the year so far, the title certainly justifies its position as the reigning champ of the past 12 months. An enormous open-world experience, Elden Ring may be the only game some play this year, and will continue to occupy the discourse for months to come. This leaves open the conundrum of what releases should win the silver and bronze medals. Unfortunately, plenty of fantastic titles will be forgotten come December, as Elden Ring dominates the conversation. I'm not saying that the game doesn't deserve this adoration because it is such a fantastic achievement, but there's so much more out there that warrants attention, and could appeal to an audience that weren't fond of From's latest or don't have the means to play it. That's why I have 5 other games that deserve your attention. You may have noticed that this video has been released smack bang in the middle of 2022. Not because there's no new games on the horizon, but rather the past 2 months for me have been a milestone larger than passing another year. I've moved homes, moved jobs, and have just passed 5 years making videos on YouTube. During this up and down time, I've played a lot of what's come out since January, and it just so happens that a number of serious bangers have dropped all at once. Rather than wait until Christmas, I want to celebrate them right now. Though, as we're halfway through the year, I'll do half a top 10 list and focus on just 5. To be expected, these games all appeal to my sensibilities. They're short, quirky, and easy on the wallet. However, they also excel in their premise, and set the bar for others to clear, just like Elden Ring has done for the entire games industry. So this is the top 5 games of 2022, so far, that aren't Elden Ring. I'd like to start my recommendations with a game that has slowly grown to become a phenomenon on par with Elden Ring, despite being made on a millionth of the budget. It's possible you already know what Vampire Survivors is, and if you don't, I guarantee that you'll be buying a copy before the end of the video, and not just because it's available on Steam for $3. A single digit price should be a sign of low quality, and book cover judges will be further turned away by the game's screenshots. Vampire Survivors' presentation is at first glance crummy, and I imagine there's someone within Konami's legal department furiously pixel counting, but that low fidelity look is indicative of what gives Vampire Survivors its fangs. Combining an idle game with a twin-stick shooter, Vampire Survivors asks a player only to navigate a character through hordes of approaching enemies, whilst automatically queued attacks clear their path. Slain foes drop gems that can be spent enhancing that automatic attack, forcing players to get in the pit in order to progress. Fans of geometry wars and bullet hell shooters have likely heard this all before, but Vampire Survivors enhances that usual dance with its upgrade system. These power-ups are partially randomised, creating a roguelite feedback loop of constant discovery and experimentation across new rounds. These greater upgrades feed into the game's escalating challenge, as horde sizes reach ridiculous levels with each round, all without a dip in processing power. Vampire Survivors is cookie clicker meets Doom Eternal, trafficking in the dull sensation of witnessing big numbers and being an army of one. There's an addictive quality in cutting down hundreds of enemies and sucking up their gems in such a passive manner, making the game one of the lazier power trips one can enjoy. It's not brainless, however. As combat is handled for the player, they can instead focus on playing footsies, pushing forward and kiting their foes. When the game stops to take a breather, anytime the character levels up or loots an upgrade, players can slow down too, and get analytical with their power-up choices. Modern games have been an arms race to push eye-popping spectacle, and yet Vampire Survivors achieves its delirium through cartoonish escalation, in spite of its lack of detail. Like a garage band that lacks shiny production but makes up for it by playing loud and energetic. This isn't to say that Vampire Survivors is a dumb game. Apart from the clever design measures mentioned, the developer continues to push out patches to tweak numbers on cooldowns and item potency, engineering the game to a degree that players are never not enjoying themselves. Even its use of simple graphics is a masterstroke. Many sprites look pulled out of the GBA Castlevania titles, which were designed to pop on a darkly lit screen. It turns out they do just the same amongst a horde of hundreds. The designer kept things simple, and saw dividends. Vampire Survivors' single input interface makes it surprisingly accessible. It's playable on a touchscreen, computer screen, or just about any screen with very little tutorialization, and that makes it enormously appealing. Although its design owes credit to the mobile title Magical Survival, Vampire Survivors has been able to tap into something that game didn't: the PC community. Content creators like Northern Lion have put this passive combat game in front of millions, and since then Vampire Survivals has exploded in popularity. The simple reason is because once you've seen it, you're keen to try it yourself. It's easy to pick up and play, but it remains difficult to master. And because it is so cheap, it's very easy to recommend to friends, further incentivizing the want to improve. Vampire Survivors harkens back to the glory days of flash games on the school computer. Often these titles were made by people around your age, with whatever assets they could scrounge and a single game mechanic at their core. They were appealing because they had all the bombastic great games and none of their chuff, often reflective of what the designer behind the code liked. And in that computer lab environment, you could see what others were playing and directly compare scores. Like Minecraft and others before it, Vampire Survivors is an example of how sometimes the biggest games can come from the most humble origins. Already, titles like 20 Minutes Till Dawn have iterated on the original game's design, proving that Vampire Survivors has already had an influential impact on other designers. Although, unlike a flash game, Vampire Survivors does require a little bit of your cash. But considering the many hours I and others have enjoyed with the game, I'd say it's absolutely worth it, especially because it supports the developer improving this smash hit success. When I was a teenager, my favourite channel was BBC Three, and my favourite show was The Real Hustle. A spin-off from the Beebs TV budget Ocean's 11 series, The Real Hustle was a demonstration of the true-life confidence tricks that the former show glamorised. Tonally, it was a 29-minute terror video on just how easy your wallet, keys and phones could be pocketed by a determined criminal. Having always been somewhat logic-brained, I adored being shown the steps of how these elaborate cons were pulled off. More so, I could feel confident in knowing that I wouldn't fall for these same scams. Card Shark, the latest title from Reigns developers Nerial, scratches that same itch. From a cursory glance, it's a card game, though as much as Portal as a first-person shooter. The player isn't asked to play cards like in Slay the Spire or Inscription, rather they play a game about playing cards and their function within sleight-of-hand tricks and elaborate scams. Set in 18th century France, players become an apprentice to a conman, and the pair set off across the country to fleece coins from the gentry. Not only is the game set in real-world history, with many of France's most notable appearing throughout its story, but the tricks a player learns are real-world techniques. Initially, there's a lesson on free card Monty, but what hooked me was the introduction of in-jogging, a known term in magic circles for pulling off card prediction tricks. Card Shark has great attention to detail, making it all the more alluring. The same goes for his history-blending story, which further enhances the fantasy of being a card shark as you bowl over people whose names made real history books. It's not as timely as The Real Hustle was a decade ago, but Card Shark makes me feel like a conman. Unfortunately, all my marks died hundreds of years ago, so no one can tell me off. Best played with a controller, Card Shark is the first game I've played since 2018's Florence where on-screen interactions and player input so wonderfully mesh together. Rather than the tale awkwardly conforming to a single genre, instead each card trick is presented like a WarioWare minigame. Each has their own unique interface and presentation, and completing them quickly and correctly is necessary so as not to draw attention. Animations of these elaborate tricks play out clearly, and motions are so intuitive that they become second nature. But what's more interesting than WarioWare is when these tricks are combined and stacked onto each other. More elaborate cons require the use of multiple tricks in tandem, and the player must coordinate their fingers across their controller like a waltz, all whilst keeping an eye on the ticking clock. As a player becomes more confident with these inputs, so too does the main character. These are confidence tricks, after all. Card Shark succeeds most in long, unbroken sessions where mental plasticity retains these various commands. Otherwise, a player will be going back to old cons in order to re-tutorialise themselves, bringing the story to awkward halts. Although these tricks are employed for nefarious purposes, it's genuinely fun and exhilarating to set up and execute them successfully. Games are, after all, an avenue for power fantasy, and that should include being the biggest trickster in revolutionary history. Granted, Card Shark is very much a game that appeals to my sensibilities. Not just mechanically, but also its subject matter. Card Shark remains strong throughout, and is the most unique title I'm recommending. You may have played games with cards, games like WarioWare, visual novels and titles set in this period of real-world history, but Card Shark manages to stand out from all these influences by being the ultimate sleight of hand simulator. We've gotten to a point of time where we can now have nostalgic throwbacks to classic iPhone games, and Poinpy is the Shovel Knight of this burgeoning movement. Before I get into more details, a warning that this game is mobile only, and requires a Netflix account in order to play. Yes, the server's better known for Stranger Things and all-you-can-eat streaming. While I can't say in good faith that Poinpy is the reason to buy into Netflix, it's a brilliant treat for a subscription you likely already have. I do hope that the game may get a second life away from Netflix, but considering they funded the development, it's unlikely. Mixing Doodle Jump, Angry Birds, and even the developer's previous title Downwell, Poinpy is a vertical platform game controlled with only swipes and taps. Playing as a small green dinosaur with a big eraser, this upward climb is motivated by a big hungry cat, who must be satiated by Poinpy collecting specific fruits and crushing them into juice. Foregoing any on-screen buttons, the hero is propelled through the air by jump orbs, activated when a reticule is pulled away from their body and let go, like snapping an airborne piece of elastic. Tapping the screen causes them to pause mid-air and come crashing down. These can be chained on enemies and pots to gain extra jump orbs and airtime, creating a satisfying rhythm of in-air traversal and stomps. It's almost rhythmic in its approach, like light strums and guitar plucks. All the while, the way ahead grows increasingly more complex, and the cat demands become more specific. Poinpy manages to make these randomly generated traversals all the more enticing with a very generous upgrade system. Even when your little dinosaur fails to get further than they did previously, all trips generate experience points and currency, meaning that eventually there will be something new to unlock. To the left of the start screen is a slot machine that generates equipable upgrades, and even the main character's ability to jump is improved through multiple games. Similar in design to Vlambeer's ridiculous fishing, progress is always being made, even if milestones aren't being hit. As levels grow more complex, Poinpy becomes more capable to balance that out, and the core game loop remains satisfying throughout, encouraging that desire to reach new high scores and see what potentially lies at the end of Poinpy's adventure. Although it's not a free game, Poinpy feels like an absolute steal because of just how much fun I've gotten out of it, and there's underlying depth to that experience yet discovered. Like the best roguelites, the right mix of semi-permanent upgrades and fleeting power-ups motivate further trips up the chasm. The game even includes an entire mode that reworks the platforming into single-screen jump puzzles. All this in a title that I get as part of a subscription I use to watch Better Call Saul and occasionally films. When I said that Poinpy feels like a nostalgic throwback, it's not just because it manages to mix and combine elements of the App Store's greatest hits. It also lacks any of the predatory elements that define modern mobile games, like the naive earlier years of the platform. Although you do need a Netflix account, that's the only buy-in. Poinpy has no timers or energy system. You can't even buy upgrades with real money, only with the currency gained through play. As a result, nothing is diluted to drain your wallet. What makes the game all the more enticing is that it's a full flavour experience that tickles the same pleasure centre as Vampire Survivors. There is a joy in building enormous combos by chaining enemies and pots and props together, collecting more than the needed amount of fruits and then slamming your combo in with a juicy explosion of colour and noise. Ironically, the game feels in tune with its platform. For a subscription, you can watch as many films or shows as you want on Netflix's service. You are the hungry blue cat, constantly demanding bigger combos, and Poinpy is more than willing to serve that up. This is the first game I consider a killer app for Netflix's game service. Although it does nothing on the surface that benefits being part of the platform, it does feel in tune with their most successful products, catering to a specific audience instead of chasing wide appeal. As stated, it also celebrates what's so great about the vertical, touchscreen-driven smartphone interface, with none of the baggage. I do hope that Poinpy sets a standard. I'd like to see more developers getting the opportunity to make games unburdened by the hardships of the App Store, even if it means being tied to the Netflix ecosystem for a while. Looks can be deceiving, and Tunic is perhaps the most surprising game I've played in some time. Underneath the veneer of an indie Zelda-like starring a cute fox is one of the finest puzzles I'm glad I got to solve on my own. Unfortunately, this makes writing about Tunic as daunting as some of its largest challenges. How do you celebrate how brilliant an experience it is without ruining that experience for someone else? More so, how do you find something profound to say about Tunic that wasn't already covered in Transparency's comprehensive video? Well, I guess I'll talk about my time with the game. Tunic was bought on a recommendation. On initial impressions, it felt like an Xbox Live Arcade game. It's a genre of release I've missed because of their cheap price point, and often these titles use that limitation for creative opportunity. Many of them found innovation by instead recreating old ideas for a new audience. This was my initial assumption about Tunic, as it takes influence from early Zelda and later FromSoft titles. From the latter is a combat system focused on stamina management, and from the former, everything else. Fortunately, the comparisons didn't stop at that surface level. Both these titles are rightfully celebrated for letting a player figure out progression for themselves, and the same is true for Tunic. The story and even the interface is purposefully enigmatic, but they do reveal themselves if a player is willing to take a leap of faith. That includes going areas the little fox shouldn't, or staring at puzzles that can't yet be solved. It's a risky first impression, but Tunic's price point and small size made me more interested to stick with it. I played the game over a few evenings, and I'd attempt to overcome one big challenge as a bookend each time. These required me to make a leap of faith, although fortunately many had a soft landing. Tunic has the option to turn off health and stamina management, and these are appreciated as exploration and puzzle solving feel much more important here than combat. That's not to say that combat is bad, and in fact one of the coolest things you can learn early on is how a certain action can be chained into a new ability. What makes it even cooler is the fact that it's always been there, and so on replay it can be activated immediately. The same is true of much of Tunic's world. It evokes the ancient relics of the NES era, where games would have little to no in-game prompts and it be to the player using a manual or guide to figure out the rest. Eventually, these worlds become comfortable holiday homes, as players retain lessons learned. However, for someone born 40 years after these materials have long since gone, they must instead use their own intuition to translate the game. Tunic takes this idea and turns it into its central thesis. There are plenty of small puzzles to solve, but the biggest is the entire game itself. Taking cues from games like Fairs and The Witness, Tunic transforms a perfectly functional adventure game into a game about what makes games great. When you start to see the world as a bigger puzzle to be solved, it encourages the one to experiment, and your correct assumptions are paid off in glorious fashion. However, many of these leaps of faith can't be made in Tunic, requiring players to do a little bit of external problem solving. Tunic is the first title since Resident Evil 2 that had me grabbing bits of scrap paper to draw out diagrams and puzzle solutions. I even used Photoshop to photo merge screenshots for one puzzle. It was mad work, and yet the payoff was all the more satisfying for it. However, much of my Tunic experience wasn't just informed by what I did in my own time. My motivation to keep going was sharing secrets with others over Discord. Although I was born far too late for Zelda 1 and wasn't in the early Demon's Souls communities, this external feedback loop felt like what these games likely had. The only other times I've ever shared content from a game like this was Breath of the Wild, in that early period where cool opportunities were discovered for the first time. Although Tunic is a lot more simple than that game, its reach grew as large, as I became part of a puzzle-solving team. Tunic is a game that wants to surprise you, and in that respect I will continue to talk around its content. However, it does make a far more appealing first impression than many other games of this type manage. Its art style is genuinely lovely, and it easily has one of the year's best soundtracks. Its aesthetic qualities do clue a canny player in that perhaps Tunic is more than just its surface level, and yet its adventurous tone runs throughout. It's not a cynical inversion of a Zelda-like, but instead it's an adventure game that transcends its own dimension and into our own. Ever since Shigeru Miyamoto named his heroic protagonist Link to denote the link between the player and game world, Tunic brings this idea into the modern age. A celebration of external factors influencing a digital experience. One I haven't been able to stop thinking about, long after the credits have rolled. If I had to sum up Neon White in a single word, it would be cool. A blend of Ghost Runner, Danganronpa and YouTube AMVs, players take on the role of the titular Neon White, a supernatural assassin who must clear heaven of invading demonic entities. Released by Annapurna Interactive, Neon White is easily the coolest game of the year, and this identity goes beyond its borrowed credibility. From Ghost Runner, Neon White is ostensibly a first-person speedrunner. Levels are designed to be completed in fractions of a minute. Unfortunately, the game has an instant restart feature for players keen to shave seconds off their score. Cutting the quickest path from A to B isn't enough, as demons also have to be eliminated along the way, but doing so is made easier by a litany of ranged firearms. In a twist on convention, these weapons are temporary and have a secondary function once they're burnt. For example, a ranged rifle can be dispelled for a forward boost to speed, which allows movement over large gaps and destroys any enemies in a character's path. Many of these enemies contain these weapons, and as you can expect, the puzzle of many levels is figuring out how to chain enemies and weapons together to create the fastest path possible. It's immediately a cool concept, and replaying levels is an appreciation in just how much technology there is under the hood to speedrun. The highest compliment I can give to Neon White is that even after completing a level once, I'll stick with them, either to get the highest accolades or just challenge myself to do better. And their small size and fast reloads encourage that. Even when a player only grazes bronze and silver medals on a level, small secrets are drip-fed by the game, such as alternate paths that cut out entire sections of platforming. Neon White even has an active leaderboard system, and much of the extended fun I'm having with the game has been racing my Steam list to destroy their times. As I'm playing the game with a controller, it's unlikely I'm breaking into the top 5 anytime soon, however. The Danganronpa elements come in when we learn of Neon White's story and motivation. Between these speedrun missions, the story and side activities are presented similar to that visual novel. Characters are flat illustrations in 3D environments, and voice acting fills in a lot of their personality. As a style exercise, the music and look feel of a piece with Spike Chunsoft's series, and the story feels like a riff on the work of Suda51, who has previously worked with many of those developers. Downtime activities flesh out much of Neon White's version of Heaven, a pristine vacation spot where hitmen are treated like waitstaff and given missions by angry cats. The character of Neon White is your typical amnesic protagonist, and so the story has license to espouse, and it drives a mystery players can dig into through interactions with his peers. If wanted though, these elements can be skipped to just focus on the speedrun gameplay, but it is important that levels are completed to gold or above, because that's how new levels are further introduced. Finding gifts in these speedrun levels and handing them over to your peers also unlocks unique levels to dig into. So in an improvement over the familiar elements in Danganronpa, these gifts unlock more cool levels players actually want, rather than just developing the story. These two gameplay types should be incompatible, but they're made cohesive by that third element: anime music videos. In interviews, the developer has stated that, in contrast to his previous family-friendly game, Neon White was squared aimlessly at freaks. And I understand the sentiment. For anyone who has ever created their own fight scenes with downloaded MP3s and clips from animes, Neon White is the game for you. It takes what's cool about watching an anime hero cutting up enemies and translates that sensation into something playable. Rather than making the game a series of hour-long levels, there's short clips that show Neon White at his most badass, and put the players directly in control of pulling off those slick moves. And again, their short replayability almost calls to mind editing a clip down to its best parts. This speedrun layer is designed with maximum anime appeal, and that one extends further into the social layer. The cast of Neon White are excessively horny, and designed so that a player has maximum affection towards them. After all, getting to know White's fellow Neons is how the story unfolds, and they are designed with big personalities to contrast the player's blank slate. Your mileage may vary on how effective that is, however. Like how the game has made me a speedrunner, I can't help but be enamoured by these elements. Maybe the correct term is appreciate these elements. Neon White is ostensibly a style piece, and that includes elements that would get removed from conventional games. These questionable elements aren't here because the developers dropped the ball. Rather, these elements are evoked to create an exact tone and mood that elevates the gameplay layer. As stated, that tone is of the coolest YouTube AMV you can actually play. The horny character designs and dialogue are evoking an era of anime this combat is pulled directly from. And this sheer dedication to its identity, in the face of a homogeneous market, is what elevates Neon White beyond just being a pastiche of games you may have already played elsewhere. So why would I sum up Neon White as cool? Because it's a heavily subjective statement, but cool has often been a signifier for those that embrace complete autonomy. Neon White is a style exercise, evoking the traits of games of years past that are equally as cool, but it doesn't feel try-hard. I mentioned Suda51 not because the game is a pastiche of Killer 7 or No More Heroes, but instead that Neon White feels like a game he would make, a creation unlike others are putting out, with a firm authorial voice behind it. Like Danganronpa, Neon White feels like a PlayStation Portable game that didn't catch on in the West, and has grown a dedicated cult of cool kids around it, who know all the characters and themes. Now it's available to a wider audience, you too can be in on what's so special about it. Perhaps the only thing that would make Neon White more thematically appropriate is if, like those games, it had a notoriously bad PC port. Fortunately, Neon White runs like a dream, and that's good because speedrunning is the name of the game. To sum it up, Neon White looks cool, it plays cool, and makes you feel cool for playing it. In that respect, it's maybe the coolest game released all year, and it might be some time until another game manages to outcool it. So this has been a look at my top 5 games of 2022 so far that aren't Elden Ring. Despite so many qualifiers, each title deserves an accolade come December's deliberations. Apart from the key points mentioned, every game punches well above its weight class. Whether that's a one-man development project that delivers more excitement per second than the AAA, or indie darlings that bend away from popular genres and formats. There's even innovation to be found beyond consoles and the PC, with a mobile game that harkens back to the golden era of iOS with a modern sensibility. Like Elden Ring, these games are all state-of-the-art, and raise a high bar to be cleared. But there have also been a few silver medal winners that could round out my potential top 10. Power Slaved Exhumed is a night dive restoration of a shooter that was never given classic status. A shame considering it's a fully fledged Metroidvania Doom clone, and a brilliant one at that. As has been the case with Night Dive's previous work, his look and underlying structure is left untouched, but interface and presentation has been thoroughly modernised. It lets Power Slave be appreciated almost 2 decades past its inception, and it's as fresh today as it was on the Sega Saturn. Then there was Nightfall, a daring journey, a free-to-play experiment from the developers behind Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, released this past Valentine's Day. Taking elements from the Battle Royale genre and even Mario Kart Double Dash, it was a cooperative PvE title where teams of 2 knights raced to the centre of the map to grab a rose. The title played with a few interesting concepts, having to make regular pit stops in towns to recoup resources and avoid the deadly night, a winding map that could be skipped across if horse momentum was maintained, and even the general rhythm of combat as one player drove ahead and the other sniped from behind. All of these were in a midst to encourage cooperation, as players could split up tasks and roles to succeed over the competition. Unfortunately, Nightfall is no longer being maintained, as it was ultimately designed as a gag gift for February 14th. Although I can't say whether the game was a success, I would love to see more of these small projects be thrown out into the wild from other developers. Finally is Power Wash Simulator. This is only a silver medal winner due to its early access build dropping last year, and full release just a while back. I say this because, unfortunately, it's maybe my favourite release of the entire year. A dad game in the truest sense, taking the joy of paint by numbers and presenting it in the style and perspective of Doom. Not a cerebral or cathartic experience, but if you're looking for something to play whilst working through a backlog of podcasts, there's few better choices. Hopefully before the year's end, I'll have the opportunity to play some of the games I've missed, like Sifu and The Quarry. Until then, I hope a few of the titles mentioned might find a place on your own personal top 10 lists. I'd also be keen to hear in the comments which games I didn't mention might be winning bronze, silver, even gold medals from you in 2022. For now, I've been James, and I'll see you all in the next upload.